I knew something in my life had slipped far past ordinary the moment I opened my banking app and saw a message that wasn't supposed to exist. Your identity update is now complete. For several seconds, I just stared at the screen, my pulse lurching, the back of my neck tingling with this strange certainty that this wasn't a glitch, wasn't a prank, wasn't something I could swipe away and forget. It felt as if someone had reached directly into the scaffolding of my life and quietly rearranged a beam. My name was still there, but not the one I recognized. I blinked.
Once. Twice.
The letters didn't change. My breath snagged in my chest, caught between confusion and the unsettling notion that a small, unseen hinge had swung open somewhere inside me. I didn't touch anything. I didn't breathe deeper. I just stared. The name displayed on the account wasn't mine. Not the name I'd used for years. Not the one on legal forms or job applications or the mailbox outside my apartment. It wasn't even close. It was softer, gently curved vowels, a hint of lilac in the syllables, as if a whisper had crystallized into writing. It didn't belong to me. And yet, in some quiet, unguarded corner of my mind, it did. My throat tightened. I could feel the air in the room shift. No. My awareness shifted, as though the world had become sharply, impossibly real. The soft hum of my refrigerator became a low, steady murmur. The faint evening light pressed against my window like a hand waiting to be let in. Even the fabric of my shirt felt too heavy on my shoulders, like it belonged to someone else entirely. I should have panicked.
Most people would have.
But instead my thoughts braided themselves into a strange mixture of unease and recognition. A recognition I could neither justify nor deny. That name on the account, hers, not mine, held something that trembled faintly inside my chest, something I'd spent years ignoring. I pressed my thumb against the screen as if it would snap me back to normalcy, but instead it opened a page of transactions I didn't remember making. Small purchases at boutique clothing stores I'd never stepped into. A payment to a cosmetics shop I'd passed dozens of times, but never dared to enter. A subscription to a channel with the word femininity in it. Nothing made sense. But the part that unnerved me most wasn't the purchases. It was the memory that flickered at the edges of my mind, like seeing your own handwriting somewhere you don't recall ever writing it. A blush of possibility. A silhouette in the fog. A sense that maybe, just maybe, these things weren't as foreign to me as I pretended. A single drop of adrenaline worked its way down my spine. I locked the phone, placed it face down on the counter, then immediately flipped it back over again, as though the screen itself were a question I could not look away from. My reflection in the dark glass stared back, familiar, angular, restless. And yet as I studied it, I felt the strange, wavering sensation that it wasn't the full story. Like a person looking at themselves from the wrong angle. I whispered the new name aloud. Just once. The sound trembled through me, a note from an instrument I'd never known I could play. It didn't feel wrong. That frightened me more than anything. I paced because sitting still made the air too thick. Each step was a quiet argument against a truth I didn't yet know. But with every movement, I felt my thoughts curling back toward the screen.
Toward the name.
Toward the quiet, unspoken possibility that this wasn't an error. That something inside me had reached forward, a part one never let speak, and had somehow left fingerprints in the real world. A soft ringing sensation filled my ears. Not quite panic, not quite clarity. Something in between. I reached into my pocket for my wallet, slowly, as if afraid of what I might find. The ID stared back at me with a name I had lived under my whole life. Solid. Familiar. Expected. But in that moment it looked like a costume. A thin shell of something I had once fit inside. A shell that suddenly felt too tight. My phone buzzed. Once. A notification. An automated bank message, but I jumped like it had whispered to me personally. Your profile changes may take 24 to 48 hours to update in all connected systems. Connected systems. Plural. Something in me went cold. Something else went warm. I didn't know which part to trust. I sank onto the couch, my thoughts circling like moths around a candle. A quiet question rose in my mind. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. What if this wasn't the world getting something wrong? What if, for the first time, it was finally getting something right? That question didn't feel like it came from fear. It felt like it came from truth. A truth I had buried so deeply it had tunneled its way up through the cracks of my life and surfaced through the one place I watched without really thinking, my bank account. And now that it was here, now that it was undeniable, it demanded to be faced. The room felt different. I felt different. As if I were made of two overlapping silhouettes and the edges had finally begun to separate. Somewhere in that uneasy stillness, something inside me whispered, not a command, not even a suggestion, but an acknowledgement. Maybe you've always been her. I pressed my palms together, trying to steady myself, but even that simple motion felt strange, like I was clinging to something slipping irrevocably out of my grasp, yet somehow into my life. I needed answers. I needed to understand how this happened. I needed to understand how I happened. But first, I needed to admit the most unnerving truth of all. A part of me didn't want to undo it. A part of me wanted to know who she was, and whether she was, in some impossible way, already me. I woke the next morning feeling like my mind had run a marathon in my sleep. My thoughts felt rearranged, like someone had shuffled the furniture inside my head just enough that everything looked familiar, but not quite the same. The first thing I reached for was my phone, not because I hoped the banking glitch had fixed itself, but because I wasn't sure which answer scared me more, if the name was still there, or if it wasn't. I unlocked the screen. It was still there. Her name. The one that had slid under my skin like a truth I never meant to let out. For a moment I didn't breathe. That quiet, soft-syllable name sat on the screen as calmly as if it had always belonged to me, as if it had always been waiting for me to catch up to it. My heart thudded once. Heavy, undeniable. I got out of bed too quickly and felt dizzy for a second. The room didn't spin, but something inside me did, like a compass needle finally realizing it had been pointing in the wrong direction and snapping toward true north. I opened my closet, half expecting something inside it to make sense of how I felt, but all I found were the same clothes that yesterday felt tolerable and today felt like borrowed skin. Shirts that were too stiff, patterns that never expressed anything about me except caution. But the worst part wasn't the clothes themselves. It was realizing how many years I had spent choosing them to avoid being noticed. I closed the closet door slowly. My hands were shaking. The images from the bank app, the unexpected purchases, the unfamiliar transactions, kept replaying in my head.
And the ID scan.
The face that looked like me softened into someone I didn't have the courage to meet yet. I sat on the edge of my bed, elbows on my knees, letting the morning sunlight pool across my legs. It was quiet, dangerously quiet. Quiet in the way that makes you hear thoughts you've tried to outrun. I whispered the name again. Only this time, it didn't tremble coming out of my mouth. It floated. It fit in a place I'd been pretending I didn't have. And that terrified me. But not in a way that made me want to run. In a way that made me want to understand. Later that morning, I went for a walk just to slow down my heartbeat. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of someone's laundry detergent from a nearby window. I watched strangers pass. People wrapped up in their own worlds. People who would never know anything about what was unraveling inside me. People who seemed to move with an ease I had never truly felt. When I wandered past a storefront window, I caught my reflection. I stopped walking. My reflection looked the same, technically. Same jawline, same hair, same carefully neutral clothing. But the way I saw myself had changed overnight. There was something fragile around the edges, something questioning, something that made it hard for me to tear my eyes away. For the first time, it didn't feel like I was looking at a stranger. It felt like I was looking at someone still in the first chapter of their real story. That realization hit like a warm ache in my chest. When I got home, I dug through a drawer I rarely opened. Buried inside was a small box, plain, unremarkable, taped shut more times than I cared to admit. I sat cross-legged on the floor and peeled the tape away slowly, feeling like I was excavating a part of myself I'd buried years ago. Inside were things I had quietly collected, a few gentle, delicate items that didn't match anything else in my life. I had never dared to use them outside the fragile safety of privacy. They felt like fragments of a version of myself I was afraid to believe in. I touched one piece lightly, the fabric soft enough to make my breath hitch. I used to think keeping these hidden kept me safe. Now it just felt lonely. I closed the lid, not to hide everything again, but to protect it differently, carefully, intentionally. This time I didn't bury the box under anything. I left it on top of the dresser, like a silent promise. That night, I sat by the dim glow of my bedside lamp, staring at the wall, but seeing none of it. My thoughts drifted back to the bank notification. Your profile changes may take 24 to 48 hours to update in all connected systems. That phrasing again. Connected systems. I didn't know what it meant. Not literally, but the symbolic weight of it pressed against me in a way that was almost poetic. Because maybe my identity really was a connected system, memories, fears, small rebellions, quiet truths, all wired together. And maybe one thing shifting a name was enough to trigger every other part to flicker awake. Something inside me whispered, gentle but firm, "You can't pretend this didn't happen." I lay back on the pillows, my chest tight but no longer in the panicked way. More like holding something fragile and new, something I didn't want to drop. Before drifting into sleep, the name floated across my mind again, this time not as a question, but as a possibility. A possibility I wasn't ready to say out loud yet, but one I no longer wanted to run from. By the next morning, the anxiety had settled into something different, something quieter, heavier, but steadier. Not quite peace, not quite fear. More like standing at the threshold of a room I'd never entered, but had always known existed. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the heater clicking on. It felt as though the world outside was waking up normally, while something inside me had cracked open, letting light spill into places I'd kept dark. I reached for my phone again. I almost laughed at how quickly the act had become automatic, but my hand didn't shake this time. I unlocked the screen. Her name glowed back at me. The sight didn't shock me like before. Instead, it stirred a strange ache, tender, almost protective, like the beginning of an understanding I didn't yet have words for. I whispered it again.
And again.
Each time it settled more naturally in my mouth, like a melody I'd always known but never dared to hum. I spent half the morning wandering my apartment, unable to sit, unable to be still. My eyes kept drifting toward the box I had pulled from hiding yesterday, the one now sitting openly on my dresser instead of buried under a coat. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The fact that it was visible, unhidden, was enough to change the atmosphere in the room. As though its simple presence was rewriting the rules I had built my life around. After pacing pointlessly for a while, I finally sat on the floor against the wall, drawing my knees close and letting my thoughts unravel in a way I'd always avoided. Why had I kept that box? Why had I collected those small, tender things? Why did the bank's mistake feel like it understood me better than I did? The truth rose slowly, like dawn creeping under a curtain. Because for years, I have lived in a body that felt like an echo of the person I should have been. Because hiding was easier than naming anything. Because pretending was safer than risking even one honest moment. My breath shuddered out. I didn't like thinking these things, but not thinking them had cost me so much more. Eventually, my restlessness pushed me out the door again. I walked without a destination, hands in my pockets, the city alive around me. Cars hissed past on wet pavement. Birds scattered from telephone wires. Two teenagers on electric scooters nearly collided and burst into laughter. Everything felt normal. And yet, somehow, the way I existed inside it didn't. I passed a shop window and caught my reflection once more. Same clothes. Same face. Same hair. But not the same posture. I was standing differently. Less guarded. Less compressed. As if some invisible weight had shifted from my shoulders. I kept looking. Not with scrutiny. With curiosity. My reflection, for the first time, didn't feel like something to tolerate. It felt like a beginning, like looking at a block of marble and realizing there might be a sculpture hidden inside if I'm brave enough to carve. A breeze passed over me, raising goosebumps along my arms. I stuffed my hands deeper into my pockets and walked on. I ended up at a small park I hadn't visited since childhood. It was quieter than the rest of the neighborhood, with worn wooden benches and a fountain that never seemed fully operational. I sat on a bench near the edge, under a tree losing the last of its leaves. A jogger passed. A man walking his dog nodded politely. A mother helped her toddler climb onto a patch of grass. Nothing remarkable happened, but sitting there, surrounded by the simple neutral rhythm of strangers' lives, I felt something shift in me. For the first time, I let myself imagine, truly imagine, what it would feel like to live as the person whose name had appeared on my bank account. What it would feel like to step into that version of myself without the clenching fear, without the internal debate, without the constant tension of being misaligned with my own skin. The thought didn't frighten me. It filled me with a kind of trembling calm. A small, hesitant smile pulled at my lips. Not because I knew what I was doing, but because a part of me, I couldn't deny it anymore, wanted to know her, wanted to meet the version of myself that wasn't built out of avoidance, wanted to stop apologizing to myself for wanting softness. The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the path, and for a moment it felt like the whole world exhaled with me. When I returned home, the light in my apartment had shifted, golden, warm, angled by late afternoon. It washed over everything, including the box on my dresser, making the fabric inside glow faintly through the slightly open lid. My chest tightened again. This time not with dread, with anticipation. Not to hide, not to pretend, just to understand. I walked toward the dresser slowly, like stepping toward a truth I had circled my entire life. I touched the box. My fingers trembled, but not with fear, with recognition. Because whatever was happening inside me wasn't an illusion. It wasn't a phase. It wasn't a glitch. It was a chance. A chance I wasn't ready for. A chance I needed anyway. The room felt still, like it was waiting for me to breathe. And somehow, quietly, gently, I did. That evening the air in my apartment felt denser than usual, like the walls were holding their breath along with me. I sat on the edge of my bed with the box in my lap, the lid slightly open, a soft edge of fabric peeking through like a secret trying to introduce itself. For a moment, I just held it, my palms warm against the cardboard. The silence wasn't heavy. It was attentive, like the pause before a truth is spoken. I lifted the lid. Inside lay the quiet, delicate pieces I'd collected over the years. Nothing extravagant. Nothing dramatic. Just small, soft artifacts of the person I had kept tucked away in the quietest corners of myself. My throat tightened as I touched one item lightly, feeling the texture under my fingertips. There was something profoundly grounding about the moment, like holding a part of myself that had been waiting for years to be acknowledged. Not used. Not expressed. Just acknowledged. I didn't change into anything.
Not yet. It wasn't about that.
The shift happening inside me didn't need fabric to validate it. It needed honesty. I whispered her name, the name from the bank account, into the stillness of the room. It felt like lighting a candle in the dark.
Warm.
Small.
Brave.
Later, after setting the box aside with unusual care, I made dinner mechanically, barely tasting anything as my mind looped through all the little ripples of change inside me. I found myself wondering about the person who made that ID update, the version of me who had stepped forward in some unseen moment. Had I created her? Or had she simply grown louder until something external reflected her existence? Either way, she was real enough now to be impossible to ignore. After dinner, I washed the dishes slowly, letting the warm water soothe the tension in my hands. I caught my reflection faintly in the window, a dim, blurred outline, but even in that soft distortion, something felt different about the way I held myself. Less rigid, less compressed, as though the truth inside me was finally expanding into the space it deserved. Later that night, as I was brushing my teeth, I saw something in the mirror I hadn't seen in years, something subtle, almost imperceptible. Hope. Not the loud kind that demands attention, not the reckless kind that burns out quickly, but the fragile, steady kind that grows quietly when you start telling the truth to yourself. I leaned closer. My face hadn't changed. My features were the same. Yet there was a softness in my eyes, as if I were looking at myself with kindness instead of skepticism for the first time. I spit out the toothpaste, rinsed, dried my hands, and let my fingers rest on the edge of the sink. Maybe, I whispered to my reflection, you've been here all along. The mirror didn't answer. It didn't need to. I saw it. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay under the covers, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling fan in the dark. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind filled with small flashes. The lavender cardigan from yesterday, the soft items in the box, the bank app with her name glowing like a signal flare, my reflection standing just slightly differently in the storefront window. All these images felt like puzzle pieces I had been scattering for years without ever assembling. Now they were forming a picture of a truth I'd been afraid to live. The thought didn't terrify me anymore. It unsettled me in the way real change does, slowly, honestly, with trembling hands but steady intent. I turned onto my side, hugging a pillow against my chest, and let myself imagine, just for a moment, what would feel like to move through the world as her. Would my voice change? Would my posture soften? Would strangers look at me differently? Not with confusion, but with the simple recognition of someone who finally matched herself? The idea didn't feel impossible. It didn't feel foreign. It felt close, as if I were standing 1 inch away from myself. Sometime past midnight, I got up again and walked to the dresser, drawn to it like gravity. I opened the box once more, not to take anything out but simply to look. The items glowed faintly in the soft moonlight filtering through the blinds. This time I didn't flinch away. I wasn't ashamed. I wasn't hiding. I rested my hand gently on the edge of the box, letting the moment settle around me. For the first time in my life, standing barefoot in the quiet warmth of my dimly lit bedroom, I felt like I wasn't running for myself. I was moving toward something. Toward her.
Toward me.
The next morning felt different. Not louder, not brighter, just clearer. Like waking up after a long storm and realizing the air is finally clean. I sat up slowly. The blanket pulled around my waist, and for once I didn't rush to check my phone. I already knew what would be on the screen. Her name. Instead, I let myself sit in the quiet and feel the shift inside me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was honest. A feeling like finally allowing myself to stand up straight after years of hunching without noticing. When I finally did reach for my phone, it was with a steady hand. I unlocked the screen. Her name still glowed there. Still soft. Still gentle. Still right. But this time, something new had appeared beneath it, another notification from the bank app. Your identity update has been confirmed across connected services. A chill ran through me. Not fear. Not confusion. Something more like awe. What connected services? What exactly had changed? What part of my life had shifted while I wasn't looking? But the strangest part was that the message didn't feel intrusive. It felt inevitable. As if the world had taken a single step toward me, matching the one I'd taken toward myself. Later, I stood in front of my closet again. The clothes hanging inside looked even less like me than they had yesterday. Not because anything had changed physically, but because the contrast between who I pretended to be and who I was beginning to accept was becoming impossible to ignore. I pulled open the drawer where the lavender cardigan lay folded. My fingers lingered on it, tracing the knit pattern as if memorizing it. I didn't put it on. I just held it, feeling its softness warm the hesitation in my hands. One step at a time. That mantra looped in my head like a lifeline. I set it gently back in the drawer and chose something simpler, just a softer t-shirt than usual, one I used to avoid because the fabric felt too light, too delicate, too much like something meant for someone gentler than the version of myself I used to enforce. When I pulled it on, it didn't feel wrong. It just felt closer. Around noon, I decided to visit my sister. Not to tell her anything. I wasn't ready for that, but because being alone with my thoughts felt too much like holding a fragile gift without knowing how to protect it. On the walk over, I kept feeling like people glanced at me a little longer than usual. Not in a bad way. More like they were noticing something I hadn't said out loud. My posture, maybe. The way I moved. The quiet softness I didn't realize was showing. When I reached my sister's apartment, she opened the door before I could knock twice. "You look good," she said, her eyes narrowing with gentle curiosity. "Different but good. Did you get a haircut?" "No," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Just slept well, I guess." It wasn't a lie. Not the whole truth, but the closest I could offer. She hugged me, and I stiffened for half a second before relaxing into it. Her hugs had always been grounding, honest in a way few things were. We spent a couple hours talking about nothing important.
Work.
Weather. A silly TV show she wanted me to watch. But the whole time, I felt her glancing at me, like she was noticing tiny shifts I wasn't ready to explain. When I finally stood to leave, she said something that stuck with me all the way home. "You seem lighter. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." She didn't know what I was doing. Neither did I. But hearing her say that made something inside me unclench, like I had permission to move forward. On the way back, I stopped by the little fountain park again. A few kids tossed pebbles into the water, their laughter echoing against the stone. I sat on the same bench as before, watching ripples form and fade. Maybe that was what I was going through, small personal ripples, each one touching the next, expanding in ways I couldn't predict. Maybe transformation wasn't a single moment. Maybe it was a series of gentle shifts, a slow unlearning, a quiet blooming. I closed my eyes for a moment and imagined myself months from now. Not perfectly formed, not magically changed, just more myself. The thought warmed me from the inside out. When I got home, the apartment was silent again, but it wasn't the anxious silence from before. It felt like the space had grown with me, expanding to fit the version of myself that was emerging. I walked to the dresser and opened the box again. Not out of desperation, not out of fear, just out of honesty. I touched the soft piece of fabric I'd held last night. Then another, and another. Each one stirred something inside me. Not longing, not confusion, but recognition. Like they were mirrors, reflecting back small truths I had tried so hard not to see. I didn't change into anything tonight either. I didn't need to. All I needed was to stop flinching at the truth of myself. All I needed was to let the idea of her settle into my chest without forcing it away. And for once,
I did.
I placed the lid on the box gently and left it on the dresser, not hidden, not disguised, simply present. A symbol, a promise, a direction. Something quiet but undeniable. Something real. The following week unfolded in ways I didn't expect. Nothing dramatic happened. No sudden revelations, no confrontations, no cinematic turning points, but the quieter moments had a strange gravity to them. I noticed myself standing differently in line at the grocery store, shoulders not pulled backward in that stiff, exaggerated posture I used to rely on. Instead, I stood naturally, allowing my movements to loosen, soften. Not on purpose, just the way my body wanted to exist when I stopped policing every angle of it. And people responded differently too. Nothing overt, nothing obvious. Just small shifts, more warmth in strangers' eyes, a softer tone from the cashier, a sense that the world around me was adjusting to a version of me I had only recently allowed to surface. Every day felt like learning a new language I somehow already understood. The most unexpected moment happened on a Thursday afternoon. I had opened the bank app again just to check something mundane, and there it was. Her name. Still there. Still unchanged. Still quietly waiting for me to catch up. But this time, I didn't stare at it with disbelief or confusion. I didn't feel that jolt of shock. I didn't feel like I was looking at someone else. It felt familiar. It felt like mine. I traced the screen with my thumb, not touching the letters, but hovering close enough to feel their presence. My reflection in the black glass of the phone looked softer than I remembered, like the internal shift was finally casting ripples outward. For the first time, seeing that name didn't feel like a glitch. It felt like a doorway. That evening, I finally took the lavender cardigan out again. I laid it on the bed carefully, smoothing the sleeves with a kind of reverence. My hands weren't trembling the way they had before. My mind wasn't racing. The moment didn't feel forbidden. It felt inevitable. Still, I didn't put it on right away. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to honor the moment, to feel the full weight of what it meant. It wasn't about fabric. It wasn't about appearances. It was about choosing honesty over habit. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the cardigan loosely in my lap, and felt something deep in my chest, something old and quiet and patient, begin to unfold. Not bloom, not transform, just unfold, like a long-closed hand finally relaxing. After a while, I finally slipped my arms through the sleeves. The fabric settled around my shoulders with a gentlest weight, light but grounding, soft but steady. Like an exhale I'd been holding for years. I stood and walked to the mirror, expecting shock or doubt or self-consciousness. But when I looked, all I saw was alignment. Not perfection. Not sudden clarity. Just undeniable alignment. Like seeing myself, not the version I had performed, not the version I had constructed, but the version that had always been quietly waiting. I didn't look transformed. I looked honest. And that honesty was more beautiful than anything I had braced for. I touched the reflection lightly, not out of disbelief, but out of recognition. "There you are," I whispered. It didn't feel like meeting someone new. It felt like returning. The next day, everything felt subtly changed. I moved through my apartment with a sense of presence I hadn't felt in years. Even making coffee felt different, like my hands finally understood who they belonged to. I didn't wear the cardigan out. Not yet. I folded it carefully and placed it at the top of the drawer, not hidden, not tucked away, just visible. A small declaration. I'm not running from myself anymore. And that was enough.
For now.
A week later, my sister invited me over again. I debated ignoring the invitation, not because I didn't want to see her, but because I suddenly understood that I couldn't hide the shift inside me even if I tried.
But I went anyway.
Something inside me insisted that hiding was the one thing I didn't want to do anymore. When she opened the door, she blinked at me. Not startled, not confused, just surprised by something she couldn't articulate. "You look," she began, then stopped, searching for the right word. "Different. In a really good way." I felt my pulse quicken, but I didn't shrink back. This time, I let the compliment settle instead of deflecting it. "Thanks," I said softly. "I'm figuring some things out." Her expression warmed instantly, her shoulders relaxing as if she'd been waiting for me to trust her with something, anything. "I'm glad," she said. And she meant it. That simple sincerity loosened something inside me that had been knotted tight for years. I didn't tell her everything. I wasn't ready for that. But I told her enough that I was exploring parts of myself I'd ignored for too long, that I felt like I was growing into someone who'd been quietly asking to exist. She hugged me, without hesitation. And for the first time, I didn't wonder whether I deserved that kind of acceptance. I just received it. Walking home that evening felt like stepping through a world that finally recognized me, not because anything external had changed, but because I had quietly, steadily begun to recognize myself. Not with certainty, not with finality, but with honesty. I unlocked my apartment door, stepped inside, and caught my reflection faintly in the darkened window. For once, I didn't look away. I didn't flinch. I didn't analyze. I simply looked. And there, in the quiet dimness of my living room, wearing a simple shirt and carrying the soft warmth of my sister's acceptance on my shoulders, I realized something. The bank account didn't make me her. It simply reflected the truth I'd been growing into. A truth that wasn't finished. A truth that was still unfolding. A truth that belonged to me. And for the first time in my life, that truth didn't feel frightening. It felt like home.